And Brother Branham was a wonderful prophet, but he was not a photographer. And my mother followed his example in all things. So all pictures that either one of them took are out of focus. But you can get the impression of what they wanted you to see. Okay, this, to start with, this is the house that's on 8th Street in Jeffersonville, and this is where my parents lived when I was born. They were married in 1941 and moved in here. Actually, it's a two-people house. They just lived in the front 2 rooms. Somebody else lived in the back. And I was born in 1946. But before I was born, in March of that year, my dad had come home from work one afternoon. He was still working for the electric company in Indiana, patrolling the lines. Some days he did walk as much as 30 miles looking for broken insulators. He came home and there was company sitting on the porch, and he went to walk around the side of that building. And there was a whirlwind that came out of that tall tree there that's to the right of the porch and slammed him against the side of the building. And Mother came running over and said, "What's the matter?" And he says, "I have to find out what all of this is about. I'm going to my cave, and I'm not going to come home till I know what's happening." And when he went to the cave, that's when the angel came, gave him his commission, told him he would be given 2 signs. And he asked at that time, "Can I wait till this baby is born?" My mother was pregnant at the time with me. And when I was 2 weeks old, Dad left for his first major campaign, which was to St. Louis. And that's where we lived. This little house is where we lived until I was 2 years old. In 1947, when I was 1 year old, Brother Jack Moore came to visit. And he was a contractor down in Louisiana. He traveled quite a bit in the meetings that Dad was having, very large campaigns, thousands of people attending. And so when they were in a campaign in Canada, he took up an offering and bought a house for us. Because he couldn't imagine Brother Branham living in this house. You have to understand there was no indoor plumbing in this house, and neither one of my parents had ever had, up to this point, indoor plumbing. So Brother Moore took up an offering, and they built us a house up on Ewing Lane. Now this picture was taken in the 70s. I did not have a slide of an early picture of this house. But on the main floor, when it was built, on the main floor there was about 1,200 square feet, 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom. What did I do? With a full basement. And can you imagine how they felt moving into this house when they had never even had indoor plumbing before? They were so awestruck that we did not even, Mother wouldn't even cook in the kitchen for a year. Other slides here. Now this is an earlier picture of the house. This is not a supernatural photo, and I'm not trying to make it out to be, but it's the only thing that I could find that showed the driveway, the entrance to the driveway. The long, slanted rocks there. Just again, I found another one. This is some of my cousins, my little sister here in the front, and then some of my cousins. You can see what the driveway, the entrance to the driveway looked like. Brother Branham talked about this a lot on tape, how when they had the vision in 57, when the stones were torn down, that was the time to move west. And the part that they tore off was right up to the part where the lamp was on there. So this slanted part down there on the other pillar. That's what the city came through and tore down. So that was the entrance to our driveway. Let's see if I have another one. Okay, this is another picture of the front of our house. Dad also talked about the green shutters with the little white crosses. This is my mom and dad, and one of the stories that Dad used to bring home, but I'd like to orient you a little bit here to the front of the house. The 2 windows that are behind there on the porch, there's a door and 2 windows right there in the back, and that area was my dad's den room. And you would walk across the porch, and the door to the left went into the kitchen. So as you can tell, my dad basically knew whatever was going on out on the porch. We'd wake up some mornings, people would be sleeping on the porch, sleeping on the steps, sleeping in their cars in the driveway, and sleeping on those gates. It was slanted just right for sleeping. The gates coming in, they put their pillow there, and they would be waiting for whoever came out of the door first. And to ask to see Brother Branham. And usually I was the first one out of the door to go to school. Stepping over people, excuse me, you know, to go get on the school bus. And so many times my friends would say, Rebekah, you have the strangest friends. And I just tell them, you know, I know y'all are just jealous. Nobody cares enough about you to sleep on your doorstep just waiting for you to come out in the morning. And while I'm on this slide, I wanted you to take note of that. There's a tall shrub that is at the left end of the porch, the very left end of the porch there, right as even with the kitchen door. Oh yeah, this is just another shot of Dad. It was one of the strays he used to bring home. We had quite a zoo of animals. Now, Dad liked to clown. Many of you know, have a hard time believing this, but he was. He did like to clown, and this he called his cowboy pose, bow-legged cowboy pose. And as you can tell in the other picture, here, just a second, I'll go back up. My mother, she dressed a little more normally, you know, but this was Dad's favorite clothes. And he would come in from hunting like this, and he'd tell Mother, he'd say, now, Mommy, don't wash these. In another couple of weeks, they'll smell just right. Just stand them up over there in the corner for a while. Now, this was his dress-up cowboy outfit. This is actually a picture taken down at the old tabernacle, standing there. And in this picture, Dad had his hairpiece on. And many of you may not know, my dad lost his hair when he was very young, and he lost it very quickly. There was somebody put acid on his head, and he lost his hair very quickly. It left his scalp very, very tender, and he was prone to his throat closing up. He could not be in a draft. He could not be in air conditioning, and his throat would close up. And in his position, you can imagine what a disaster that would be. So initially, he got this hairpiece that he could wear to keep his throat from closing up. And sometimes he wore it for that, and then sometimes later he wore it because the Lord told him to. And for instance, in 1965, when he preached Who is This Melchizedek in Marriage and Divorce, the Lord told him to wear the hairpiece. And I don't have an explanation for that. All I know is that he told us that was so because we all hated it. All of us kids, we just hated it. And when Billy Paul went to pick Dad up, the day that he was preaching Marriage and Divorce, he went in and Dad had the hairpiece on, and Billy Paul made a comment like, "Oh no, you're not going to wear that, are you?" Well, Dad just turned and went back to the bedroom and shut the door. And he was in there for quite a while, and then he came out. And Billy Paul began to apologize. He says, "Daddy, I'm sorry. You know, I didn't mean to hurt your feelings or anything." And Daddy said, "No." He said, "Paul, wasn't that? You can't hurt Daddy." He said, "But the Lord told me to wear this, and I just wanted to make sure that you hadn't said something that you shouldn't have. That, you know, this is how I just wanted to pray for you." Now, the story behind this is my dad and myself. Now, the story behind this is my dad and myself in a field of daisies. George, is this? Okay. I was not a happy baby. My mother said she prayed 5 years. She and Dad were married for 5 years before I was born, and she says, "I prayed 5 years for a baby." She said, "Then I was afraid to pray for another one." I screamed, literally screamed 2.5 years. Just screamed. Mom would get an opportunity to go on meetings with Dad. They'd try to go in someplace to eat. Dad would walk me up and down the street while Mom would eat, and then Mom would walk me while Dad would eat. And I'd be screaming the whole time for no reason. I'll tell you how bad I screamed. When I was 2 years old, I fell off some steps at a neighbor's house. And about 3 days later, and I screamed, okay? 3 days later, Mother pulled my little undershirt up pulled it off of me over my head, and I passed out. Took me to the doctor. I had a broken arm. But I screamed so much anyway, they didn't even know my arm was broken. I just screamed all the time. So one day, Mom and Dad and myself, we were in the car driving to a meeting. And I was sitting on Mom's lap, screaming. And all of a sudden, Dad pulled over. And he said to Mother, give her to me. And he took me, he walked out in the middle of a field, and Mother was watching him. She says, he held me up. She saw him hold me up. She was terrified, had no idea what was going to happen. And she said that she felt the anointing in the car, you know, when he pulled over. And he held me up, he prayed for me, and he said, Satan, I know this is you on this child trying to get at me in my ministry. Come out of her. And the demon left me. And he even said on tape after that, he said she was the calmest of all my kids. And this is probably about a year later. We were driving along that same road. We drove by the field. It was filled with daisies. And Dad got out and had Mom take her picture. He says, as a memorial that she'll have later on. So this is where the demon was cast out. Of course, I used to use that a lot with my brothers and my sister. After all, the demon was cast out of me, but they still had theirs. This is me and my jammies standing out in front, and I'll tell you what day this was. This was the day the possum was healed. Now, that possum, when it came into the yard, I was so shocked at where she went. She came down the driveway, went up into the yard, across the stepping stones, and went right over there in the corner of that porch and laid down behind that tall tree. Now that was my spot. I could not believe she'd gone to my spot. This is where I would hide from my mother. There was a little indentation there where I used to sit there and read. I always loved to read, and I would sit there and hide and read. And so many times my mom, bless her heart, she would come stand on that rail and yell, Rebekah! And I would just sit real still down there. She never looked down, she never saw me. And that was my spot. I had it all hollowed out exactly right for me. And that possum went over and laid down right there. And when she laid down, all these little babies came tumbling out. And I tried to get close to her. I tried hanging over the rail looking at her. Oh, she looked so pitiful. And all these little babies didn't even have hair on them yet. Just pitiful little things. I don't even know how many there were. And I ran downstairs, and I remember finding the lid of a mayonnaise jar, because she was laying on her side. I thought, she can't lift her head, she can't get up to drink. So I got the lid on that mayonnaise jar, come out, filled it there at that faucet, and took a stick and scooted it over where it was right under her nose. And then once they had determined she didn't have rabies, I actually went and laid down kind of on the other side of the bush so that I could lay my head down at her level and try to get some sort of response out of her. But there was no response. And I know all day, all afternoon I worried about her, and man, I even got up in the night worried about her. And the next morning, right as I came out the door, Dad was down there praying for her. And I walked over to the railing and scooted down and watched him and listened to him as he prayed for her. When he finished, I stood up and he stood up, and that possum stood up and just walked straight across the yard, straight back out the driveway. And I came down and stood by Dad, and we were both crying. We were both crying. And he told me, stand right here. Stand here just for a minute. And he ran in the house and got his camera and came out and took this picture. And he said, you remember this day and what the Lord has done for this animal. And you remember how much more he wants to do good things for you. And that's what day this was. Possum picture. Every fall, in October usually, the last of October, a strange little ritual would take place in our backyard. The swings would come down and the deer would go up. Dad would go to Colorado hunting, and I tell you what, it gathered kids from all over the neighborhood. Everybody came to see this, because this didn't happen in anybody else's yard except ours. And the kids, they just thought, all the neighborhood kids thought Brother Branham was absolutely, Reverend Branham they called him, he was the star. He was their hero. because the strangest things would take place around our house. This is Brother Banks Woods, actually. He was our neighbor. He's skinning the deer there. Dad would do such things for them as he would walk them home when they were in trouble. They would come and say, when they knew they were in trouble, they'd come and say, Reverend Branham, would you please walk me home? And he'd walk them home, and he'd tell their mommies, now, they're sorry. I know they're really sorry, and they're repentant. I'm sure this will never happen again. He would talk them out of a whipping. And whenever one of the animals died, we had a little cemetery set aside, and he would have a little funeral service for all the fallen pets. And this was made him the hero in our neighborhood. We had a lot of visitors. This visitor, Dad talked about on tape, his name was Jeffers, and he owned the ranch in Colorado where Dad used to go and hunt and where he used to drive cattle on that ranch. So sometimes it was people that we didn't know, sometimes it was that little narrow driveway though, that's where the cars would line up. Actually that vehicle there was one of Dad's first vehicles that he used to take on the campaigns. It was an old, I think they called it a carry-on. They would be sleeping on those steps lined up in that driveway. Other times, this is inside our house. One of the few pictures that I have of the inside of our house, actually, a few slides, that come to have Dad Marion there in the living room. And as a matter of fact, that's Leo Mercer, who used yeah, no, that's not Gene. It's just Leo getting married. This is my mother in her most well-known pose here, hanging out clothes. She was absolutely the most immaculate housekeeper that I've ever met. She was very orderly, kept things totally in order. It was almost as though it was a part of her ministry here, was to keep order in our home. And when Dad was gone, no matter how long he was gone, when he came home, he never came home to chaos. He always came home, things were always the same at home. And I think that this was very, very important. And Mother kept things in perfect order all the time. Even when we were on vacation, she would have to wash clothes. This is up in Colorado where we would go, sometimes in the summertime, and she's hanging clothes out of the hitching post. I like this picture of Mom and Dad. Mom did not get to travel very much in meetings with Dad. This is one time she went with him to California, and this was taken there, and I believe it was in 1957. And she really was a very, very special lady. Now this picture here, George worked on it today, trying to get some of that stuff off of it, and he couldn't. But it's one of two pictures that I have of this piece of fence. This is at the front of our house, at the far left end, facing the house, and it's just a little privacy fence that comes out. There's a big fence that goes around the whole 2 acres of ground, a white fence, board fence. But this little piece of privacy fence here is where Dad was mowing one day, and there was a birdhouse, actually a big birdhouse, sitting on the end of it, and he ran into that fence, and that birdhouse was filled with hornets and came out and surrounded him. And he said to them, to the hornets, "Little hornets, I'm sorry I disturbed you." He had his shirt off. It was a hot day, he was rushing, and so many of those bites, it could have killed him. And he said to them, "Little hornets, I'm sorry I disturbed you, but I'm in a rush to get this yard mowed. I've been having to stop doing it on and off all day because people have been coming. I've been trying to pray for people." And he says, "I'm sorry." He says, "Now, you just go back in your houses. I don't have time to play with you today." And they all went back in their houses. And so this is the only picture I have of that fence where this took place. This is my little brother Joseph trying to pretend like he's going to help mow that 2 acres. The fact is, Dad kept the yard 99% of the time. He did all the mowing. And it really bothered him when he'd be gone a long time and the grass would get all mowed up because he liked to keep it really neat. He was really particular. He tried to be particular about his yard and about his car. He loved a clean car and a well-tended yard. This picture was taken down in Florida, and I don't know the name of the swamp where they were fishing, but that's Billy Paul on the right, believe it or not. And my dad, and I think those largemouth bass, that's what they were fishing for. And some brothers were fishing there with them. And at one point, Dad had hooked a big bass and started reeling. And he thought it was going to come loose from the hook. And Brother Welch Evans was there. And Brother Welch ran out into the water and grabbed that fish for Dad so that he wouldn't lose it. And when he did, a snake that they call a cottonmouth water moccasin struck him and bit him in the foot. Now, they were far, far away from anyone. They were miles away. And immediately the brother was just over the Welch. We've got to get you in immediately. I mean, it's a deadly snake. And an awful looking snake if you've ever seen one of them. They're horrible looking. And Brother Welch, he says, no, Brother Branham, you pray for me, I'll be fine. Dad prayed for him, and he was fine. His foot never swelled, he never got sick, never got a fever, never had one symptom from it. They just went on fishing. Yeah, that's Dad's fish. An old trick there, hold it up close to the camera so it looks bigger than ever. Give it right, Dad. Yeah, he liked to clown for us. He also had this little thing that he used to do, blowing up his muscle, and somewhere he'd blow on your thumb, and then he'd have us pull his pinky in, and then all the muscle would go down. So he'd blow up his muscle, and we'd let the air out. He'd blow up his muscle, and let the air out. This is Dad in the shooting range out in Arizona, and he was particular about his guns. And they had to be sighted in just right. They had to be able to drive a tack at so many hundred yards before he would ever take that rifle hunting. It was precision hunting. He liked pistols. Dad got used to carrying a pistol whenever he was patrolling the lines for the electric company there in Indiana. Because walking all that ways and walking through the bush and everything, snakes, he always carried a pistol at that time. So even though he didn't hunt a lot with pistols, he loved to target practice with pistols. So it's one of my favorite shots, one of my favorite hunting pictures of Dad, even though he's not hunting here. And don't you think the safari had there adds a good element with pistols? And it looks like he's in Arizona to boot. Yeah, Dad was in his element when he was in the wilderness. There he's chopping some wood up in British Columbia. And you know, at one point when Dad was considering leaving the field, this is where he thought he would like to go, was British Columbia. He actually said he hopes that the Lord will let him live in British Columbia during the millennium. He loved it there. We tried to be typical tourists. Now this is at Niagara Falls, you know. It was hard because we would leave, Dad would have a week or so off, or a couple weeks, and we'd think, okay, we're going on vacation. And we would get up real early in the morning and leave when it was still dark. Well, by the time daylight rolled around, we looked around and there'd be 2 or 3 or 4 carloads of people following us. They stayed where we stayed. They ate in the restaurants where we ate. They stopped at every stop where we stopped. So we didn't have very many private vacations. But we tried. I don't know what that was. What's happening here? That's Sequoia National Park. Look at that. I mean, Hammond in a suit traveling. You know, when it was just Billy, Paul, and Dad traveling together, Dad would wear jeans and a sports shirt. But if ladies were along, you know, if the rest of us, ladies in the family, went along, Dad would usually wear a suit. This is some of our entourage stopping at one of the lookout sites. You know, 4 cars of us always. Now this is one of my favorite pictures of Dad. This was up in New Hampshire, up close to where that Hurricane Mountain, where he was lost in the blizzard. that he tells about in the message, My Guide. And I took this. I took a couple shots of him up there. But I loved it because there was nobody there but us. It was just family. He was so relaxed, and it shows on his face. He's just relaxed and having fun. I have a couple pictures here that are just interesting. One day, this is a long time after Dad had passed away, we had, George and I had Mother in the car with us, and we were going along the road down near the river, and Mother said, look at that, stop. And we stopped, and she says, that is Dad's old boat. Dad had a boat that he lived on for a while, before he was ever married the first time, and before the baptismal service on the Ohio River. He lived on a boat on the river. And at the time of the baptismal service, he pulled it up to the dock there at the foot of Spring Street, and this is where the people changed their clothes before they went in and were baptized there in 1933. And the name of this boat was the Wahoo. This is Dad and Brother Tommy Osborne. I was looking for a picture of Dad with Brother Oral Roberts. There was a story I was going to tell about clothes. And Dad, to me, he always looked nice in his clothes. He had a presence that he wore his clothes well. But he never had an expensive suit in his life. I know Brother Jack Palmer every year would buy him a suit. And sometimes the church would buy him a suit. But I mean, he never had more than 3 or 4 suits at a time. And they weren't really expensive suits, because he didn't want to put a lot of money. He didn't believe in that, putting a lot of money in clothes and brand names and all of this. It did not affect him. But it was in 1965, I'd gone to one of the meetings. My friend Betty and I had gone to a meeting with Dad up in Pennsylvania, in Philadelphia. And Oral Roberts was there. And one morning, it was at one of the services, and they had a little platform set up there, and Oral Roberts spoke. And Dad was sitting next to him. Oral Roberts was standing, and Dad was sitting right next to the pulpit, next to Brother Oral. And my friend Betty and I were sitting up on a mezzanine, so we were looking straight down at him. And I was looking at Dad, and all of a sudden, I saw him reach out, just real slowly, reach out with his right hand, reach over, and feel the material in Brother Oral Roberts' suit. Afterwards, I said to him, I saw what you did. And he said, oh my, sis. He says, I have never felt fabric like that in my life. He says, it was the most softest, nicest fabric I've ever felt. And he says, and then you know what? He says, when Billy Paul had come and got me for that meeting and I was going to preach, he said, I looked down. Here's this man standing there in this suit that must have cost $500. I looked down and my coat and pants didn't match. He says, I grabbed the wrong coat and it didn't even match. But and that's when he preached Mighty God in the Mail. This is Dad and Brother Leo Mercer, who run his office for a while. I wanted to show you this picture because, see that little trailer behind? That was Dad's office. That's the office that he had when he went to Oral Roberts' offices that time. Do you remember that? And he was walking through and he said, oh my. He said, I've never seen such wood. I've never marble. He says, I've never seen such offices in my life. And he says, and to think, I've got one little typewriter in the front of the trailer. And that's the trailer. That was Dad's office. This photo was taken in Finland. And the little boy was raised from the dead. If you recall that story, Dad said, we'd been up on top of a mountain sightseeing. He says, on our way down the hill is when they found the little boy hit in the road that had been killed. And he had a vision of it happening 2 years before. And that's Brother Jack Moore standing there next to him. And it was Brother Moore that said, remember, Brother Branham, we wrote this in our Bible 2 years ago, that this was going to happen. And this little boy was raised from the dead. So this was immediately before that happened. And that little boy is still living today. He's a policeman in Helsinki, Finland. This was Dad, once again in his element, out in the woods, getting ready to go out hunting. He's just having a word of prayer there with the man. This is Brother Borders on the right and Billy Paul on the left. This is from one of his last hunts, the trophies. One of his last hunts in British Columbia was the ram on the left and the big jim there on the right. We were living in Arizona at the time, and when he got his trophies, he was so thrilled with these trophies. This is the den room. I put in a few pictures of the den room in Tucson. And Brother Branham put everything in the den room. The summer of 1965, we had come back to Jeffersonville, crated up all the animals and everything, and he had taken it to Tucson and placed the things in the den room. So I just have a couple pictures from the den room here I want you to see. This is the chair where Dad studied that was in his den room in Jeffersonville. And he talked about having a nice wide arm on the side. He didn't like to sit at a desk. He liked a chair where he could put up his feet and lay his pad of paper on the arm there and write. And that was his study chair from his den room. That is in the den room now. This is the picture. It was on the end wall in the den room, and it faces a place called Pima Canyon. And Dad wanted the artist to reproduce this scene from that canyon. Now, Pima Canyon, a lot of people come to Tucson, and they only go to Sabino Canyon. They never go to Pima Canyon. But Sabino Canyon is where the sword came down. And Sabino Canyon is where Eagle Rock is. But this is Pima Canyon. It is not far from our house. And this is where the Lord came down in the pillar of fire and showed him about marriage and divorce. And the school children were dismissed and came out and saw the cloud. So he was wanting this artist to reproduce the scenery up in the canyon. So it was a woman artist, and this is a big wall, by the way. She came out, she penciled it on, and tried to draw it, and Dad came and looked at it, and he goes, no, you got the water going the wrong way. So she tried again. He goes, no, I'll do it. So he drew it on there, and she painted it. Wow. And you can't see from this picture, but there's deer in there, there's javelina in there, that are standing in the rocks that you can't see. It's really a beautiful picture. This is Big Jim, and the gun that's up there, that's Blondie. So many people who come to the den room expect to see Blondie, a light-colored wood on the stock, but this was Blondie. And it's hard to make out what that is, but that is a golden eagle, a mounted golden eagle that is on the coffee table there. And even back in 1965, the golden eagle was illegal to kill him, but this eagle had been killed illegally, confiscated by Fish and Game and taxidermists. And then a man that Dad talks a lot about on tape, his name is Brother Ben Bryant. He was in California, I believe it was, and he was at a ranger station and saw this eagle and decided he had to have this eagle for his prophet. And any of you here know Brother Ben Bryant? I want to tell you, with the way he is, I'm sure that in a very short time, those rangers were saying, just take it and get out of here. So that's how Dad ended up with this eagle. It's beautiful. It's very large. Even though it's still a baby eagle, it still has some white tail feathers, but it's very large, very impressive. This is one of what my little grandson calls the piggies. This is a javelina. This is what Dad was hunting up at Sunset Mountain when the angels appeared. And they are vicious. And we have some who still have a herd of them in our backyard, basically. They're in Tucson. But these that are stuffed here, it's a trophy animal, and these that are in the den room, this one, there's a little story behind here that I want to tell you about Brother Branham. When he got this, it was a trophy. And every year, there in Tucson, there's a hardware store that has a prize, and they give a new rifle to whoever brings in the biggest pig. And this particular year, Dad had the biggest pig. I mean, it was a whopper. So they had to rush home. We got on the Sunset Mountain. They rushed back to Tucson and rushed over to this hardware company because you had to register it before the deadline. And I mean, they were just minutes from the deadline when they got there. And it was a really nice rifle that they were giving away. So they got there. Dad jumps out of the car and runs into the store. And right at the door, there was an old man sitting there on the step, and he had an old rifle sitting next to him. And Dad stopped, and he said to the old man, do you have a big pig? And the guy said, so far, mine's the biggest. So Dad sat down next to him and started talking about his pig. And he sat there and talked to him till the deadline had expired. And the old man won the rifle. And everybody's pig in. Well, the brothers that were with Dad, they got upset. Brother Branham, you should have gone ahead, registered your pig, won the gun, then you could have given it to the old man, but your name would have been in the record book as having the biggest pig this year. And Dad told him, he says, no, it's so much more important that the old man wanted himself. He says, if somebody could come in at the last minute with a bigger pig, than the old man had, he says, I'd have taken mine in so he could have had the gun. He says, but I wanted the old man to win it himself. And I think that tells a lot about his character. Some of y'all may not have been to Jeffersonville. This is my dad's tombstone. There's a cemetery in Jeffersonville. And I don't have a close-up shot of it, but it has the 7 steps on the other side, the messengers on another side. This is the cemetery right down the street. The tabernacle, if the camera was panned just a little bit to the right, you'd be able to see the tabernacle right down the street. This is the picture of Dad that my mom carried in her wallet. She said it was one of her favorite pictures. She says, oh, he's so handsome. She said, but look how tired. You can tell what a life he's had. And it all shows in his face. His whole life shows in his face on this one. So this was my mom's favorite picture. It was taken in Chicago. At the time, I'm trying to think of the year, George, help me out here, when he had the problems with where they lied about him, and they said Brother Branham isn't here, and he was there. And they wouldn't let him speak because he had also agreed to speak for Nancy Jose. So they gave him they told him, you either don't speak for Nancy Jose and speak for us, or he don't speak for us ever again. So he made his choice and he went to speak for Brother Manson. Oh my goodness, how did this get in there? These 2 beautiful, beautiful children, my goodness. It's William and Angel. Those are mine. And you know, I put these in here because all you mommies and daddies that are here, with all these little kids that are this age now, I want to tell you, I took this picture yesterday. That's how fast the time passes. Really, really quick. And you've got the biggest responsibility right now is when they're this age. You know, being Sister Rebekah, I get a lot of phone calls. And they want to know, what would Brother Branham do? How did he do with you for this specific thing? How did he handle this? How did he handle that? And the most heartbreaking thing is when these calls are from parents that have teenagers, that all of a sudden the parents have tried to set down rules, tried to set down standards, but for the first time, when they've never done that before. They have to know at this age. They have to have respect for authority at this age. Don't let the time pass. Take care of it now. One thing we were never allowed to do at home was sass our mother. Now kids sass in a lot of ways. First time they stomp your foot, they're sassing you. Don't let them get by with it. We were given ultimatums. We knew, there was never a doubt in our mind what our parents expected out of us. They made it perfectly clear, and they never compromised. But if you don't start it at this age, you can't wait until they're 15 and all of a sudden start laying down the rules without having trouble. When it came time, like with Billy Paul, when he turned 16 and he wanted a television set and he wanted this and he wanted music, Dad gave him an ultimatum. He said, I've got to keep an atmosphere here where the Holy Spirit is comfortable. And you can't have that at this house. You abide by my rules or you leave. And Billy Paul left. And you have to apply the same rules. Yes, he was a prophet, and you think, oh my goodness, I don't have to have, that kind of an atmosphere. You do in your home. It's the same Holy Spirit. You have to keep that atmosphere in your home where the Holy Spirit will feel welcome. And your kids will grow up feeling that, and they'll always want that. When they go through the rebellion, they know that there's an ultimatum, and there's no compromise. It's the best thing that you can do for them. The best thing that you can do. Just ask Billy Paul. Brother Osborne told me that he thought there might be some of you that had some questions that you wanted to ask. If there are any questions, I'll do my best. They go around